Alright, let's just get into this. There we go. It's a little bit more like it. Alright. So, today we are starting on the Colossal Gargantuan Blue Dragon. It's been a long time coming, and this is the first thing we're going to do on it. We're going to knock out his base. That's going to definitely be the first and easiest thing we can do on the model. As you can see here, it got primed in blue. The person that did the 3D printing for me did not do a super great job on making sure everything was cured and primed correctly, so I went ahead and just gave that a do-over. I hit it with the 3D, the UV lights, and all that good stuff. So hopefully we'll be a lot better. And I wanted to do, since it's a blue dragon, I wanted the whole thing to be blue. And yeah, pretty happy with the way it looks. And this blue undertone will help us a lot as we move forward. All right, so without further ado, let's get started on this base. And if anybody asks, we can always show off the big dragon. I would have to go get it. I'm on vacation, so I've been drinking some soda. Lots of energy. Let's see here. All right, first things first, let's go ahead and we're just gonna grab a big old brush for this. Now we will be using a texture paste instead of the sand that we have down here because it's not really all that visible, but we'll get to that here in a sec. I'm going to do myself a small favor before I start touching this thing all over. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to attach it here just to this. Let's see, do we want the handle or not? Might be a little bit too close to the camera here for it to do the handle. No, it's actually perfect. Sick. So we're going to grab some scissors and some 3M tape, and let's go ahead and just get this all ready to go. Oh no. Oh no. Alright, we're fine. So we'll just put this here. Like so. Just to give us a little something better to attach it to. One layer too low. Or I'll tell you what, actually why don't we just do it like this. Good old poster tack it is then. Alright, let's just go ahead and give it one of these. There we go. Boom. So, yeah, and let's go get the model. I'll show that off. So here's our model. We're just now, of course, working on the base of it. And the wings are separate, but this is actually our Dungeons & Dragons Gargantuan Blue Dragon. A little hard to get on screen here. But yeah, I primed in blue just to get that nice undercoat. And you can see here some of the issues with the priming. I mean, the curing of the resin might still cause us issues. There's some spots in here too, but I think we're all good there. But yeah, he's got 2 big wings that are a little bit too big to make it wieldy, and since it is a blue dragon, there's lots of little spiky bits all over him. So this is going to be a blast to paint. We'll do that in the next couple of streams. But as for this stream, we're just focusing on his base. So let's get you... let's put you safely back in your little house there, buddy. Actually, I'll make a new house for you right over here. Boom. So let's go ahead and get just a base coat down on these rocks here. And I want to go with, since it is a desert theme, we're going to be mixing some yellow and light gray together. So let's go with find our light grays here. Oh, no, it's a little too light. Yeah, ash gray. We'll start with that, and we will throw in just a little tiny bit of, let's go with either demonic yellow or, let's see what we got here, angelic yellow. That's funny, demonic yellow, angelic yellow. I'll use the angelic yellow, it's a little darker. Or a little warmer, sorry. Ooh, that's actually really warm. I like that. We'll do that. Alright. So, I'm going to mix these up. This one should be pretty good, but I haven't used this sun yellow in quite some time. So, we give that one a real good shake here. And we're going to see what that looks like here. That looks pretty good. So we got a little bit of that there. And our ash gray. Get a nice little bit of that there. Nice little bit of this here. And we'll just, actually, this is fine where it was. We're just going to go ahead and take a little bit of that yellow and start mixing it in here into the gray. It's very green. Not a fan of that green. So I'll tell you what we're going to do instead. Is if it's already a little bit green, it's going to look really green when we throw it over top of this blue. So instead, we're going to use our desert yellow as a base coat here. Yeah, we'll just use this one straight, and then we'll add some gray over top. And that's for these natural rocks. The pillar we'll tackle a little bit later on in the project here. But here we are with a nice big brush. Just gonna go ahead and start getting some color down here. Remember, as always, thinner paint is perfectly alright. As long as it's not running around all over the place, we can always add more coats. So we are fine with thin paint that doesn't really cover up the layer underneath, as long as it isn't running. Well, running on something like this isn't that big of a deal, but running into areas that we've already painted, then we would have a serious problem that we would need to fix, but this is fine. There we go. Decided to go with the desert theme, mainly just because I didn't want to mess with this base too much. I liked the desert theme that they already had on there. I was like, that's fine. Blue dragons in Dungeons and Dragons are oftentimes in the desert. That makes a lot of sense. We want our paint to be a little bit thinner here because that's where one of the feet of the model goes, right in here. We don't want it to, we want to make sure it gets paint because we want to make sure it's the right color, but also we need to make sure that we aren't taking up too much of the space. It's a little thin up through there, but we can fix that. The one thing you don't want to do is try and correct something like this right now, because as you can see, yeah, you might hit like the absolute perfect balance of new not so thin paint with the already way too thin paint that's on there, but more than likely you're still going to have paint that's still just a little bit too thin, just compounding your problem. Just taking our time, making sure we're getting all the details. Don't want to leave any little spots unpainted. Don't need to be careful yet. Not the part of the night. Or even the part of the project where we need to be careful. If you look around at nature, nature really wasn't careful when it was building things, when it was making things. Things aren't clean. Why do we need to be clean? Exactly, we don't. At least not when we're creating things like this. You have real thin paint like that, you're going to see it pull up in places. Not the end of the world, because most of that is water. So it will evaporate. There is no need to fret. And in our case, it's a rock, so if it does end up creating a small lip or an edge where there wasn't one before, it's still just a rock. Making sure we get the underside of the rock here. Get these rocks down in here. I don't believe a lot of these rocks will survive the new painting, the texture paste that we're going to put down, but if they do, we want to make sure that they're the appropriate color. And this down here is definitely a rock. I almost missed it. And I see a tiny little crab down there too. Okay, that's fun. I love that little detail. We're going to have to paint that crab, unfortunately, as we want to make sure we get what's underneath him. But that's okay. Tiny little crab will forgive us. Yeah, there we go. Let's go ahead and just do this whole little corner there. And some of the spots that are particularly blue, we're just going to go give a real quick better first coat too here on the big rock. Yeah. That rock, well, that's part of the pillar. That's part of the pillar. These are both parts of the pillar. Yes, those are skulls. Let's go ahead and get these couple of little rocks down here. No rock left behind. And just get these as well. And there's a tiny little rock. Look at that, we found most of our rocks, guys. That's exciting. There's another one. Now these could all be debris from the pillar, but I'm going to make them little rocks for now. Okay. Okay. Alrighty. How's everyone doing tonight? We all having fun? Alright, actually I'm going to change the name of my stream here. Or like the... make sure to credit the Lord of the Prince, which is the people that actually created this STL file that we used here for this tonight. Alrighty. I see a couple more little rocks down there actually. Let's go ahead and grab these real quick. Okay. Now, you look at this. Looks pretty bad right now, but don't you worry. There is a plan. Because it looks just like greenish rocks, right? Ah, we got plans for this. We're actually going to take a little bit of this moon dust yellow, mix it with a little bit of white, start to make a nice sandstone-y color. Unless if I have a nice, good, more sandstone color. Actually I might. Try this. But it's not going to be just applied to the whole thing. We're going to try some skeletal bone. We'll try that first. The reason we didn't start with this is it just wouldn't look right. We want to kind of build up our colors. And we're going to be applying it a little bit differently. We're going to apply it with a nice big thick brush like this. Because we care, again, a little bit less about getting into every tiny little detail. This should give us, I think we're probably shooting for like somewhere between like 70 to 80% coverage on this when we're applying with this. So like so. But as you can see, we do have a little bit of our undercolors coming through, which is why we needed to establish those first. And there's one of our rocks, more of a base coat. So that's actually what our base coat's going to be. This is our kind of our establishing color for this before we start messing with our contrast. About an 80% coverage of this, maybe closer to 90 now that I'm applying it, seeing we aren't quite as translucent as I imagined we would be. I'll tell you what, we're actually going to grab our detail brush, and when we come across them, we will go ahead and grab those tiny little rocks when we get to them. And again, technique is going to go ahead and get it on the brush there. It's pretty wet. This is, again, as you can see here, look at my brush. I mean, I like to show my brush because when I was first started painting, I always was struggling with what my brush looked like and getting the right control over it. So that's what we're working with here. We're just moving back and forth in circles. Get not super heavily. Just kind of, if we're stopping, if I'll pause here in the middle of what I'm doing, that's kind of, you can see there, that's the amount of pressure that we have on there. as we're going back and around. So we definitely have enough pressure to get to all of our details, but we aren't super concerned about making sure we're getting 100% coverage. Kind of like cleaning, you want to make sure that you've cleaned everything, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to fully disinfect absolutely everything in your life. And if you end up getting spots like that right in there that are a little bit more coverage, doesn't really matter. It is, however, going to be important that we get the bottom here. Make sure we get nice solid colors down here. Because you want the bottom of this rock to be very not busy. There we go. Get that in there. Get this up here. And there we go. Now we're looking more like rocks. Let's go ahead and get down here with Crab. And yeah, we're going to get a lot of layers of paint on this crab before his life is done. Let's go ahead and just extend this out here a little bit on all these. And we're also going to use this same skeletal bone on these skulls, and I'll show you how in just a second here. We're going to show how even if we end up doing like the first couple of steps the same, or just a similar base coat, what the huge difference we can get is just with the next steps. Because you wouldn't think that we'd be painting these rocks and these stones in the same color. But let's grab some of these rocks here. And for this, I'm actually going to pull it off this, so I have a little bit more control over what I'm doing. Love these brushes. This is the Fine Touch. I forget which series this was. Very, very good brushes, actually. Those big. If you're looking for ones like that you can do kind of heavy dry brushing with, base coating. If you like to base coat with a dry brush technique, which I will not explain, but if you just look up base coating with dry brush, it'll be very obvious. There's a lot of videos on it. That debris I'll call the other color. But this debris is definitely our sandstone. Again, I'm pretty sure a lot of this is going to get covered up with these tiny little pebbles, but you never know. We don't want to have to make it look unnatural when we do that, but it'll look even more unnatural if we don't have it painted correctly at all. Ah. There we go. Get just a little bit along the edge here. Make that color a little bit more pronounced along some of these raised ridges here. And just, this is kind of like highlighting. We're not being too fastidious about it yet. But I wanted to make sure that we have a nice established lines in here. Like this right here. We want to make sure that this line is very visible, because otherwise it'll get lost in the detail. You see that? It's a little harder to see it. And I want to make sure everyone can see all the cool work that we're about to do. Alright, get some off-white here, get that on there. Make sure I'm in camera here. Oops. Okay, now let's go through and get these skulls. Doing a pretty thick, solid coat on these. Let's get these guys as well. These tiny little bits of rock. Yeah, those skulls are definitely going to take a couple of coats here. We might even add in a little bit of a brighter color here. We'll see what that looks like in a minute. I see a little lizard there. I'm very excited to paint that little lizard. Okay, that's exciting. See that little guy? Yeah. Love the little tiny details like that that went into these. One more little skull over here. Almost there. So I hate painting little bits like this sometimes with all the different angles and stuff. It's oftentimes very nerve-wracking to make sure we're getting a nice solid coat, especially when it appears as though we had some print issues here. Hopefully that doesn't snap off at some point, but it might. No worries. Okay. Alrighty. I believe that is all the base coating that we're going to do right there and all that stuff. Yeah, okay. No, the pillars themselves, we will go ahead and do just in our normal ash gray there. It's very light gray. No worries though, we'll darken all of this stuff up here in a minute. There we go. Getting there, getting there, getting there. Let's go ahead and get all these little things down here too, all the pieces that fell. Let's grab that little piece of rubble too. Going with a really, really thick coat here, because I want to make sure that I get good coverage on this gray. Oops, got my brush there. Whoopsie daisy. Not going to paint too much of our lizard friend here if we can help it. Although I will say it looks like at some point our little lizard friend lost his head. I can't remember checking that detail when this miniature arrived in the mail, so maybe I knocked it off, or maybe it just wasn't there. Since the time I got it, I cannot know for certain. I will say that I knocked it off, because I feel like that's something I wasn't paying too much attention to. So let's go ahead and just paint him up here. And we'll have to cover him somehow, because headless lizard's no fun. At least I don't think so. Okay, looking good, looking good. Okay. Alright, so there's where we're at right now, as it stands. I guess I can get it on its stand here. Alright, next step is going to be to get some washes down on this thing, but it needs a couple minutes to dry. So I'm going to take a quick tenor, and I'll be back in about 10 minutes, y'all. Don't go anywhere. I shall be back. All right, so I think we should be good now. We're gonna go ahead and add a little bit of depth to these. And the way that we're gonna do that is pretty simple. We're just gonna be using some washes. Just to kind of begin to get those shadows done. Get those established and all that good stuff. Ooh, I just bumped that little dragon. And we're gonna go ahead and we're just gonna move it. Last thing we need is for that guy to get, for our dragon himself to get hurt. We can't have that. So, Paul the blue dragon is going to be put back there for a little bit. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a pretty standard recipe for the stones, the normal stones, and a slightly off color recipe for the others, for the sandstone ones. And I'll show you that one second. But we'll start right now with the really basic one, which is just going to be a dark tone to start with. And we're going to thin this down with a little bit of water here just from the cup. I am very much looking forward to my haircut next week. Next time you guys see me, I will have a reasonable length of hair. Right now it is way too long. Alright. There is that. Just going to go ahead, and this is a wash, so what it's going to do is it's going to seep into all these little details and stuff and help bring out all that little stuff that we couldn't see before. We do not want it to pool up on the surface though, so we're going to be watching out for that. Now the reason this works so great is the water tension in this paint, or wash, or whatever you want to call it, is a little bit higher. So when it seeps, it's a little bit lower, so it will seep into these crevices and stuff, kind of skim over the top, but it will, however, have a tendency to want to kind of coagulate with itself. That's why you get things like that pool. See that big giant pool right there? That's not ideal. So we're just going to go ahead and we're going to wick a little bit of that away. Yeah, just a little bit of it, because some of it's fine. Like here, there might be some actual shadows and stuff there. Or crevices, cracks, whatever you want to call them. Valleys. We're going to put everything in the peak and valley system. The benefit of this is that we're going to get to see all of the absolutely wonderful detail that the Lord of the Print team put into this model. Don't be afraid to put this on too heavily. It is going to dry thinner than it looks, don't worry. It may look like you've just entirely clogged up all of the detail on your model, but if you're following along at home, or if you're using this as a guide for something similar, don't fret. As long as you're making sure to catch things like this, that little pooling, you'll be fine. You absolutely do not want the cat hairs sealed into your model, so make sure to get rid of those. If you need me to mail you some of my cat's hair, I am sure I can accommodate this, because she leaves plenty in my projects. There we go. Oh, I was a little bit off camera there. Sorry about that, everybody. But there it is. You can see it's going to dry. Do not worry, we're not done with it. But it's going to dry a little bit blotchy, that's totally all right. That's because the ash gray is so light, it's gonna look a little bit, the wash is gonna pool and it's gonna be a little bit more obvious. And I was about to say, if you are just going to leave it at this, which a lot of people do, I would recommend using a lighter tone wash or watering it down a little bit more. But for us and our purposes, we still have a couple of painting steps to go and other materials that we're going to be adding in there, and we're going to have plenty of time to hide those sins. Okay. Alrighty. Now for the sandstone areas, we need to make almost like a custom color here. Actually, we might just be able to get away with using a contrast paint thinned down. We'll try that. Might not need to be super yellow. Yeah, I think. Yeah, I like that. Okay. Yeah, so we're just going to use this Agrax Dunes contrast paint, which is the same basically as a already thinned down wash. It has a lot of the same properties where it will leave its color behind, but it'll also skim over the top and sink into the recesses of models in the thing that we're painting. We're going to be thinning it down a little bit because it is meant to be more of a coverage type of dealio and not necessarily used as a wash. So we're going to be thinning it down with a little bit of contrast medium. Now, if you want to use something, if you're familiar with the Citadel line and you are wondering if you can use lanthanum medium instead of the contrast medium, you're perfectly fine to do so. Lanthanum medium will just thin it down and prevent your drying time from being quite as fast. So don't worry about that. But this is just straight up more medium. So if you know that paint is a binding agent, a medium, and the pigment itself, this is just adding more of the medium to kind of thin down all of the colors. So this will thin down the paint itself. It's usually best to try and add in, when you're thinning down paints, adding in your medium into your palette first, but if you live on the edge, I guess you can do them in the reverse order like I just did. And everyone knows I live on the edge. Alright, there we go. Okay, I want to make sure this is thin. I want to make sure that we don't overdo it. Okay, cool. I think we should be good. So you can see right there, that's where it was unthinned. How dark that is. This is going to be a little bit less dark, but still the same tone and hue that we were going for. Yes, there we are. Sorry, crab. I'm sorry, little guy. I think this should be the last time we mess with you. Now this is a little bit easier to work with, I would say, than something like the Army Painter. Army Painter, the tones, like the strong tone, dark tone, flesh tone, etc., those are a little bit thicker, so sometimes you have a lot more issues with it pooling up and such. Because this is not that. This is meant to be used as a paint over top of like just a primer. Whereas the tones by Army Painter are meant to be used as a wash for the model and really accentuate all the details and those cracks and crevices and stuff. Whereas this is actually meant to be used as a layer tool. You may ask yourself, what's the difference? And well, the difference is negligible, especially when you're using them for the same thing. You're just going to have more options in color when we do use things like this. but they both have their uses, as you can see. And it comes down to preference at a certain point. So here, I'm just trying to use more long, wide, confident strokes on this. Like such, see? Because we are basically just adding almost like a filter or a shade. We're essentially just filtering everything we've already done through the, I guess in this case it would be the Agrados Dunes filter. There again is where one of our feet is going to be. And you're really going to be able to see a big difference here. So you can see how much white noise we've kind of introduced into our model here, including a spot where we actually had gray. If we add our shade, the contrast paint, all of that white noise, all of that undefined detail is given depth again. How freaking cool is that, right? As you can see, everything that we have done so far, you could just go copy and paste on your own model. This doesn't require any kind of special dexterity or control, or really knowledge. This is just all stuff that I've done before. And now you can too, just by buying the paints and doing it yourself. All the crazy stuff will probably come into play when we're painting the dragon. But something like this, if you got a project at home, you want to do a nice little desert scene, or a sandstone, for whatever reason, boom, here's your recipe. I don't know if I'd call this sandstone anymore. Maybe like a, I don't know what kind of rock you'd call this. And when you're going over a lot of details and stuff like this, you're gonna get bubbles. Don't stress, they will go away. It can be a little bit nerve-wracking. You're like, wait, no, what's going on? Do not worry, you are okay. Ricky's got your back. There's no need to fret over any bubbles in your paint. Those will 100% go away as the paint dries and settles. Make sure to keep a hand on this model here. There we go. I think we got everything going. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Go ahead and give a second little coat over here. I want this to be darker because I really don't want the eye going to this section of the model. There we go. Yeah, good deal. Alrighty. About an hour into painting now. I hope everyone's having a good night. Listening to me just kind of chill and talk to myself here. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add, again, another filter, but to a different part of our model. It's going to be under these skulls here. We're going to use the skeleton horde. Big surprise there. The skeletal horde. And you'll get to see the difference between these two, between something like the rocks and this paint and these little skulls that we did with very similar base coats, just filtering a little bit differently. Get out of there. We're looking at translucent paints, so we don't need to really be as worried if we ever paint a little bit. No big deal. There we go. Alrighty. Boom. Let's see. How are we looking here on time? Yeah. 1 hour and 15 minutes. Look at us go. We've kind of hit the major milestone of getting some base coats down. Now we're going to work on the sand. And to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and temporarily attach this base to just a piece of wood here, just to kind of make everything a little bit easier. Normally I'd use hot glue for this, but my hot glue gun is not plugged in. I don't feel like finding... Actually, my hot glue gun is right here, but my hot glue is not. That's right. Normally I'd use hot glue for this, but we're going to try and use... That is actually the exact same size. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to off-center this a little bit. I did not expect this to be the exact same size as each other. There we go. Just to kind of give me a little bit of a lip to hold the whole thing on. And we're going to go ahead and get some texture paste out. Go ahead and put our brushes away here. We're going to use some different brushes. These are painting brushes. Things like texture pastes, etc. Things that notoriously just absolutely ruin brushes on the first go. We're going to avoid using those with our normal painting brushes. Very easy to just make a brush totally unusable. Alright. Here's what I'm talking about when I say texture paste. It's actually the Earth Texture by Vallejo. It's not specifically desert, but it's not specifically not, so we're just going to use it as a desert. And we're going to grab some crappy brushes, so like that one, and let's see, we got a smaller one here. Is that going to be small enough? That's a little too good of a brush. Let's grab this one, yeah. So you can see here, these are brushes that have seen better days, but still have a use here in our arsenal. Ones that we might not really be able to use for anything else, we can use for this. Alright, and I like to start with some of the little nooks and crannies first. So, we're going to grab a little bit of the texture paste. Well, let's wet our brush first. Grab a little bit on, just going to grab it on our brush like so. It's a little bit much for the tiny areas. And then, just plop it on. And given that this is a desert scenario and a desert scene, we don't need to worry too much about accidentally covering up things. Because, as we learned from Anakin, sand does get everywhere. As you can see in here, if I bring it a little bit closer here, you can actually see all of the grains of the acrylic beads in there. Actually see the texture on there. We're going to use that to our advantage in making this look like a desert. They sell a variety of these. I always like to use these on my bases, just because it makes it a little bit easier to start building up that really nice real world feel. Because not only do you get the ground coverage, but you also get that natural, I don't want to say overflow. Like if you were to stand in mud, if you saw a guy standing in mud, he would have mud on and around his shoes. He might be slightly in the mud. So you wouldn't just draw mud around his shoes, it would be slightly on them. That's kind of why I like this. Because it's the same kind of deal. You wouldn't just have sand all around all of these things. It would be slightly up on it. Maybe caked on a little bit higher. Now that's a little bit of art wash. Got mixed in there. Kind of started to flow out. No big deal. Sometimes happens when you go ahead and you're speeding through a project, and obviously you could leave everything to dry all the time. And we didn't leave our washes to dry, and now we're kind of paying the price for that just a little bit, but that's okay. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna bury this skeleton just a little bit. And here we come to our lizard with the print failure. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna use the texture paste here. We're just gonna kind of half bury this rock. Like so. We can kind of shape this into more of a sand dune-esque thing. Every so often it's a good idea just to kind of clean off your brush a little bit, just so you don't have it the whole thing just coated and going off at all kinds of angles. Makes it a little bit easier when you want to get a little bit more precise. We'll be repainting it later, but we want to try and keep that ram at least a little bit clean. go. Got a little bit too much in here. It's no big deal. Always just kind of brush and stipple it around and wipe it off. All right. If you wanted to, you can also add a little bit of acrylic paint to these texture pastes and kind of mix up your own custom color. I haven't done that too much. I usually like to paint them after they're already down and they've applied their texture, but if you wanted to, you could add, you know, let's say brown into this or green if you wanted. But you can color these whatever you want to. Now I got my bigger brush out, but I don't think we're really going to be able to use the bigger brush. Not with all of these tiny little details to go around. In fact, we might be getting a smaller one out here. I know this looks very, very bright, and it is. And that's totally alright, because we are going to darken it down. With, again, a wash here in a bit. Just want to get a little bit of this off here, just with a little bit of a tip of a Q-tip here. Or if I can't get it all the way off, just kind of spread it out, thin it down a little bit. And let's go ahead and just get that thinned. Again, thinned down a little bit is fine. I can deal with it later. I can maybe sand it a little bit, or what have you. As long as it's not that thick, we should be fine. Whatever that layer is. I'm not sure what this stuff is soluble to. Probably isopropyl alcohol. It's acrylic based, so it should be. It tries very, very hard. Tools can be cleaned with water. Yeah, so it should be water soluble, but much like many paints, when it says water soluble, it usually requires a decent amount of scrubbing. So if you want to save yourself a little bit of frustration later, you can do yourself a favor and get that done now. Okay, so as it stands, here's where we stand. So we're going to need to paint up the sand a color, but our rocks have their base coat and shadows done, as do our stone pillars here. We're going to wait for everything to dry. As you can see, we still have a lot of spots that are really, really moist or wet down in there. You see us in this crack here. We really want everything to be entirely dry before we move on to our next stage, which is adding in the highlights. I am going to call it at least a break. I might hop on here in a little bit, in a couple hours or so. But that will be determined later. If so, it'll probably just be on Twitch, not YouTube as well. I don't want to spam all my YouTube people, but if you follow me on Twitch, you'll get a little notification if you have the notifications turned on. I don't think I had a single person post a message in chat today, which is totally alright, but if you ever want to share with me what you're doing, what you're playing, what your D&D group is up to, always just feel free to chat about it, guys. That's why I do this. In the meantime, remember that everything that you do, as long as you're putting the best parts of yourself into it, you're giving it your best, it's always going to be good enough. And that's what we're about here. Good enough painting. Alright. Thank you all. I'm going to sign off, and you have a great rest of your night.